Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Intro to Web Dev workshop. I'm Jenny. I'm really excited to walk you guys through the project and just to show you some basics of HTML and CSS. And yeah, without further ado, I guess let's just quickly get started. So you can find all of the materials to my workshop in this repo here. I believe you could probably find it in one of the Notion pages that's provided. So anytime if you get lost, I'll just be referring to this, but I have my slides as well. So let's get started. So yeah, I'm gonna first just introduce like the people that will be assisting you today. So my TAs, we have Daniel, who has been the HackCamp logs coordinator, and we have Sophie, which is one of the engagement coordinators at nwPlus. And we also have Joyce, who is the logs director for cmd-f. And last but not least, we have Ryan, and he is an external tools developer at NW. And I'm Jenny. I am an internal developer, and I'm in my 4th year in the Bucks program. So really excited to see you guys, and hopefully you guys will enjoy this workshop. A couple of setup notes in advance, just some logistics things. Just make sure that you have a text editor installed, and it should be really quick. And regarding questions that you have, you can either post on the activity banter channel, or if you needed assistance from one of our TAs one-on-one, definitely reach out to us on the assistance channel. And like I said, if you get lost, keep this handy, and you can always just refer to the part of the code that we are working on. And these are just some extensions that are nice to have for when we're actually going through the code. And I've actually included them in my setup instructions. So if you have some time, definitely just try to install them on VS Code. That'll make your life a lot easier, but if you don't have them, that's completely okay as well. And I'll talk a bit about that once we go into the actual workshop. Great, so going to the actual content of our workshop. So we're talking about web development, and when we're talking about that, you know, when you're learning something new, I think that fundamentals are the most important aspect of learning a new language, a new framework, or just anything. So I'm basically here to just teach you the fundamentals of HTML and CSS because a lot of popular JavaScript frameworks like React or Angular or Vue assumes that you have a basic understanding of HTML and CSS, and being comfortable with these they're not really languages, but with these technologies will really help you pick up the more advanced frameworks a lot faster. So you can get kind of like you'll have a lot easier of a time just understanding how things work. And by the end of this workshop, you'll learn to set up the tools needed to construct a very basic web page. So we'll build a very basic portfolio, and you'll understand the fundamentals of front-end development using HTML and CSS. And at the end, I've also included a portion where you can publish your code to GitHub pages, but this part is completely optional, but I've provided the instructions for you anyways in case you wanted to deploy your code to GitHub pages. And just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So first, we will go through the basics of HTML. Second, we will talk about CSS. And alongside that, we'll just be kind of building out our portfolio along the way. And lastly, I'll just show you the instructions to deploy to GitHub pages. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and it's the code that is used to structure the web page, and its content. So everything that you see on the web page, it's structured essentially using HTML. And believe it or not, HTML is not a programming language. It's a markup language that just defines the structure of a web page and the contents. And in HTML, you'll see that we have elements that can enclose or wrap different content that would appear on the page. And the enclosing tags can make a word or image or hyperlink somewhere on the page, or it can also italicize words. But for the styling part, that's mostly done in CSS. But all you need to know that is that HTML is basically responsible for outlining the basic structure of a web page. In terms of using HTML, I just have a really quick example here taken off of the Mozilla docs with regards to web development, which I'll provide you the link at the end so that you can have a reference to it. But this is a very basic snippet, and if we wanted the line to stand by itself on an HTML page, all we would do is we would just wrap it around. We would enclose these with the paragraph tags, and so we would just enclose it with these tags around the text. And in terms of the actual anatomy of an HTML element, so like I mentioned, we have the tags, the opening tag at the beginning and the closing tag, and the content is what is inside the tag, and the element itself is essentially essentially consists of the tag, the content, or the opening tag, the content, and the closing tag. And for inside the opening tag, you can also define attributes. So for example, if you want to define classes that consist of instructions for styling, if you want to include IDs for your element, you can add attributes inside the opening tag. And in HTML, you can also nest elements. And so how this works is that you would be putting HTML elements inside other elements. So for example, one example of this is that we could, if we wanted to bold a certain word inside the sentence, you could wrap this word with the strong tag, and it would essentially just bold the word for you. But when you're nesting elements, it's just really important to be careful of the order that you're placing the tags. If the order is wrong, let's say that it's not nested properly, then you might run into issues with actually seeing how things appear on your screen. So just need to be careful about that. And in HTML, we can also have empty elements. So these are elements that don't need to have essentially a closing or a opening or closing tag. They're basically self-enclosing. And these elements usually have no content, but they basically just embed a certain piece of data on your page. So for example, if you have an image that you want to embed on your screen, you can use the image element to provide the source of the image, which is the path that the browser can find the image, and then the alt is just the alternative attribute, which lets you specify like a text for users who might not be able to see the image, or if the image doesn't load for them, something like that. But the alt attribute is more specific to the image element. And see. And now we'll dive into the actual anatomy of an HTML document. And so I'll just be talking about what each of these elements mean and why they appear like how they're placed. So first things first, we have this Doctype Html, and this is basically just required preamble that you need at the beginning of your HTML page that just ensures that your document behaves correctly, and there's kind of some history regarding like why this is needed, but this is kind of just for like just kind of required preamble in order for your page to work properly. And right after that, we have the opening and closing HTML tags. And this element just wraps the entirety of your content on the page, and it's sometimes known as the root element. And next thing is the head element. So this is the container for everything that you want to include on the HTML page that isn't the content that you want to show to your page, to your viewers. So for example, if you wanted to optimize like your search engine optimization for your page, you could include certain descriptions or tags in the head element. If you wanted to include like a title for your page, so the title would be something that appears like on that like that is basically the name of the page. When you try to bookmark it, you could specify a title, and then you could also specify like descriptions that you want to appear, and you can specify also where your CSS styling is. So then basically provide styling for your page. And these are just some examples of what you can include in the head element. And just going into the head element, these are also some things that you need to include. So one of them is this meta element that sets the character set for your document. And so this is typically set to UTF-8, which just includes most of the characters from the vast majority of written languages. And next thing is the title, and this is just an example of something that you can include in your head element. And so this element, like I said, just sets the title of your page. So if you try to bookmark your page, it'll just be whatever the title is. And now diving into the body of our document. And this is the part that contains all of the content that you want to show to your users when they visit the page. So for example, you can include text, images, you can include videos or things like that. Everything that the user will see on the page, you'll define in the body section. And now going into the specific elements that you can include in the body section. One of them is the heading. So in HTML, you can have different levels of headings. So typically the most prominent level is, or the biggest one is heading 1, and then they range from headings 1 to 6. And then you can use these interchangeably if you want to define subheadings, or if you just want to define like a visual hierarchy for your content. And yeah. Next thing is you can also have lists. So lists can be ordered or unordered. So in terms of defining unordered or ordered lists, for unordered lists, you would just need to use the UL tag. For ordered, it would just be OL. And ordered, it would just list the elements with like a numerical number before each list element. So instead of having bullet points for each of these list items, it would have a number in front of them. The next thing that you can have is hyperlinks. So what this means is the anchor element, and this just defines a hyperlink from one spot on your web page to another spot. So for example, if you wanted to embed our website into this text here, we would basically specify this href attribute, and the href just stands for hypertext reference. And when you're providing the hypertext reference or the link, just be careful of the protocol that is used. So for example, if you omit the S for secure, it might lead to unexpected results. So the tip is to always test out your link when you want to embed them on your page. And yeah, if you have any questions, definitely please post them on the Activity Banter channel, or as we're building our portfolio, if you need any one-on-one assistance, definitely reach out to us on the assistance channel. And yeah, let's get started with building our portfolio. So we're going to first work on the HTML part of the portfolio that just lays out the content. And then later on, we're going to dive into actually styling the different elements. So yeah, let's get started. So part one, if you go into the repo that I have, you'll also be able to see kind of the different parts that it's been split up into. So I'm specifically going to talk about going through part one of this. And so if you wanted to follow along, you can have this open as well. And yeah, so first thing we're going to do, I know that in the instructions it says that you want to create a directory called your username.github.io. This is mostly for if you want to deploy using GitHub pages, but for now we can just create a folder named whatever you want. So here I already have a workspace created that would contain our files. So I'm going to just first create a file called index.html, and that would be the entry point of our site. And we're going to just type in some things into this file just to get started with what we discussed previously regarding the anatomy of a HTML page. So if you remember, first thing we need is this Doctype Html is just required preamble, and then we would have the HTML opening tag and then closing tags. And inside that, we would have the head element, and we would include the meta element, UTF-8. This is going to be self-enclosing, and then for the title, I'm going to just name it Jenny's Portfolio. Okay, great. So this is everything that the user won't see when they open up your page. And now we're going into the body section. And so for the body, we're just simply going to put an H1 in there just to show that it's the top level heading. So I'm going to just say, hello, my name is Jenny. Great. So now if we wanted to see how this looks like, what you can do is, so I have the live server extension installed. So what I would do is I would basically right click, and then I would just click on open with live server. But another thing that you can do is you can navigate to where you created index.html, and you can basically just double click it, and then it'll just open the same page. But if you don't have the live server extension installed, it's not a big deal. All you need to do is you just need to make sure that you save your changes. And then after you save your changes, you need to go back to your page and then manually refresh it. So if I didn't have this plugin, I would just need to save it and then refresh the page like manually. But okay, there we go. Nice. So that's just part one. And then when we want to, yeah, like I said, when we want to make any changes, just make sure that you save your changes and then refresh the page. And now we are going to talk about another thing that's really important for designing and building our page, which is coming up with a wireframe for how you want your page to look like. So every page you see on the internet, it likely has some sort of hierarchy with how content is displayed and how things are displayed visually. And when you're designing a portfolio or when you're building your own portfolio, you want to think about what kind of content do I want to include? What do I want the hierarchy of my information to look like? What do I want the layout of my page to look like? So just thinking about the layout of your page and coming up with a wireframe before you actually build the page is something that would be really useful because you don't have to figure things out as you're going along. And with a wireframe, this is more related to design, I guess. You can honestly just sketch it out on a piece of paper, or you can use like certain design softwares like Figma or Sketch if you're comfortable with them, and you can kind of design things out from there. And yeah, so this is just kind of like a very, very, like very, very low level kind of wireframe, or like a hierarchy of how our information will be laid out. So we have the introduction, and then we have the about section, then we have the projects and the contact section at the end of our page. And so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to just start building out the different elements of our page. So first, starting off, we are going to talk about, or we're going to build out the intro part of the page. So for the intro, we basically just want to start with a div element. So this is just an element that allows you to group certain contents together. And inside the div, we're going to just have a placeholder image that represents like our picture. Let's see. So for the link here, we're just gonna add the link to a placeholder image. So https placeholder.com. Okay, just gonna check something really quickly. Okay. Right, okay, so I'm gonna just zoom in on my screen a little bit, and hopefully that will be a lot more clear for you guys. And same thing with the slides, I will also zoom in. Let me see if I can just, oh, okay. Whoops. Zoom in, oh, that's too big, okay. I'm gonna just say, just fit it on the screen. But yeah, hopefully you guys can see the code more clearly now. So after embedding the image, if we go back to our page, remember to first save and refresh, by the way. We'll see this placeholder image on the top left corner of our screen. And yeah, so this site is like a site I like to use when I need to have like a placeholder for images. They have different dimensions of images that you can embed on your screen. So this is just something that we'll be using throughout the workshop today. And after the image, I'm going to just put in my intro. It's Jenny. And for the for the actual description, I'm going to just say I'm a 4th year books student at UBC. And so if you save now and go back to the page, you'll see that you see the text that we added and the kind of the blurb that I added about myself. And so now that's basically the intro page. Now we're going to go into the about section of our portfolio, just to kind of give like the audience or give our users like kind of a preview of just a quick introduction about ourselves and like what we like. And starting with the div tags, first we are going to just I'm gonna just say that I love nwPlus. And then the second part, we're gonna have a second. Okay, and the second section of our about section would be, I'm gonna just talk about some of my interests. And here we're gonna make use of the list elements, but first I'll say some of my interests include, and after this, I will include an unordered list. And inside, I'll have different list items. So the first item, I'll say dogs, because I really like dogs. I don't know about you guys. Dog spotting and specifically, I really like corgis, so I'm gonna just write down corgis as the third list item, and I'm gonna just save and go back to my page. And yeah, we see what we put in for the about section. And here, when you're building out like an actual portfolio for your personal use, you might want to talk about like what your interests are with regards to like what you enjoy about computer science, and like what kind of experiences you've previously had, or just like you want to actually put in like more legitimate information than what I have. So what I just want to say is this is just for kind of demonstration purposes. But yeah, just keep in mind like who will be actually looking at your portfolio. And next thing is we will just go into building the project section of our page. So we should have four different components in there. And so we're gonna just start a new opening div tag right after the closing tag that we had previously for the about section. And inside here, first, we're gonna have a heading for projects. Then we're gonna have just 4 different images. And for that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just copy the image element from previously, and instead of the dimensions being 150 by 150, we're just gonna say 300. And you can make them bigger if you want, but I'm gonna just use the 300 preset just as placeholders for my images. And yeah, so we want to have 4 images, so I've just copied and pasted them. And let's now save and go back to the page. And when you refresh, you should see these 4 different placeholder images placed side by side in line. And the next thing, the last thing is the contact section of our page. And in the contact section, we will have some links related to, I'll include some links related to myself, and then also a form at the end, but let's just work on the links for now. So we're just going to include a opening div tag and heading that says links. And we're going to have an unordered list again. And inside, we will have list items. And for each list item, we're going to have the link attribute and href. So for me, I'm actually going to just include my GitHub, LinkedIn, and email. I happen to just remember them. So actually, I'm going to just quickly copy them, but feel free to put in whatever links you would like to include. I'm going to just copy this GitHub. And inside this, I just want to add GitHub. And we'll have a second list item. And inside here, I'm going to include my LinkedIn. So just going to copy this here. LinkedIn. Okay, and the last element, we are going to have just my email. So we're going to just include the mail too, which will automatically allow the user to email you when they click on your email. And so I'm going to just include my personal email here. Okay. And my email. Okay. Great. So another thing that we need to include as well is it would be nice to probably also have a form to allow people to contact you. So I'm going to just include a form right after the links section. And we're going to use the form element. And inside, I'm going to have a label for my email and say that email is the input type will be email, and these are some examples of other attributes that you can have. I'm going to just associate the label with this element by adding an ID attribute, and then the placeholder text I want to include in the input field will just be enter your email. And another label, we're going to just say message. And inside this, we're going to just say message, and we're going to include a text area. And your message. And the last thing is we're going to just have a button for the submit, and we'll also use an input element for that as well. So after that, let's just save the page, save our code, and then go back to our page. And I think there's a small issue with how things look. LinkedIn, okay, let's see. What is going on? This is very strange. Okay. Okay, I just needed to refresh my page. Okay, there we go. I was a little bit confused for a moment. Okay, great. So I'm going to just quickly check something. Oh, second. Okay. Great. So now we have our basic wireframe for our pages, for our portfolio. And we're going to actually talk about styling our portfolio. So styling the different components that we have on our page. And now this is like a nice segue into what CSS is, because we've only talked about HTML so far. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it's essentially the code that styles your web content. And like HTML, CSS is not a programming language, but it's not a markup language either. So CSS is actually a style sheet language that is used to selectively style your HTML elements. So for example, if you wanted to select all of the paragraphs on your page and then style them a certain way, this is an example of something that you can do. This would just style everything on your page to, or every single paragraph element on your page to the color of red. So your font will be red in color. And now talking about the anatomy of a CSS element, we have the entire structure is called a rule set. Oftentimes it's just called a rule. And first we have the selector for what exactly you want to style. And then we have the curly brackets. Inside that we have declarations, and you can have more than one. But declarations consist of the property and the property value. And yes, so going into the actual selector types of what you can have here as the selector, you can have elements. So for example, paragraphs, headings. You can also select IDs or classes or attributes, or you can select pseudo classes. Pseudo classes are just, for example, if you hover over a certain element, what styling would it be? So these are just some examples of certain things that you can select, and this is not an exhaustive list. So if you wanted to know more about like all of the different types of selectors, you can go into this. You can check out this link here, and this is just a summary of what the different selectors are that I gave examples of, and how you can exactly declare the what the syntax is with regards to declaring the selector. And here I have a picture of two boxes. So what I want you to think about when you're actually thinking about styling your page is to just think of CSS as different boxes on your page. So what I mean by that is that a CSS layout is mostly based on the box model. Each box has a list of properties, and that list includes padding, the padding, the border, and the margin. So the padding is essentially the space around your content, and the border is basically the line that is outside the padding of your block. And then the margin is the space that is outside the border. And so if the border is the box, essentially the padding is the space that's inside the box, and the margin is the space that is around the box. And so I just have a really basic example here. So for example, if we wanted to think about this block of text or just this element here, the border would just be what is around, what encompasses your element. And the padding is just the space between your border and the actual, like inside your border. And the padding is just what is around your border, so what is outside your border. Like always, if you have any questions, definitely don't hesitate to ask them on the assistance channel or inside Activity Banter. And another tool that I want to introduce is Chrome Dev. We're specifically using Chrome today, but I know that other browsers have their own Devtools. But the one that I mostly like to use, because I use Chrome, is Chrome's Devtools. And so it's just it's a set of tools that is built directly into Google Chrome. So when you're working on different projects related to web, you can use these Devtools to kind of see how certain elements are laid out, or you can help. It can help you debug. But for the purpose of our workshop today, we're just going to use it to see kind of the layout of all of the different elements that we have. And it can also help you edit certain pages on the fly and just to diagnose problems really quickly. And so here I've just included some shortcuts for how you can pull up Devtools. So if I wanted to, I usually just use Command-Option-I for just pulling up like what I last used. So if I do this, you'll see kind of you'll see the list of elements that we have on our screen. And I'm going to just close this. And you can use Devtools to inspect certain elements of your page and look at the padding, the border, and the margin. So for example, if you open Devtools and you, if you open Devtools and you open the Elements panel and hover over the element that you want to inspect. So for example, if I wanted to open this, go into Elements, I can look at, 1 second. Okay, what I can do, if you're on Mac, you can do Command-Shift-C. I believe if you're on Windows, you can do Control-Shift-C. But you can just basically look at the elements on your page and look at how much spacing or how much padding you have, the borders, how much the margins surrounding a certain component on your page. So if I click on this, I can see that the font size is, okay, so if I select this element, click on it, I can see the font size. I can also make this a little bit smaller. So if I change this to 1, it'll actually make the text itself smaller. And if I wanted to change the padding, for example, I could do, say, like 2M, and that will also change the padding on the fly. So this relates to kind of changing things on the fly and how how things look instantly. And I can also change the margin, for example. So if I wanted like 100 pixels, now you'll see like what I mean. So yeah, I'm actually going to just close this. And yeah, so basically the green you see is the padding, and then your the orange is the margin, and then the yellow is basically the border. And for some elements, it's very faint. But if I just take a look at this page, it's very hard to see. But all you need to know that is that the border should be yellow if you try to inspect, or if you try to look at the element. And yeah, so now that we've talked about the basics of CSS, we are going to actually add some styling to our page. So first things first, in order to add styling to our page, we need to actually create a file called, create a file that ends in, create a CSS file basically. So for me, I'm going to name that styles.css. And we're just going to name that in the same kind of directory as index.html, just at the root of our project here. And to integrate this style sheet here, what we need to do is we need to include a link in the head element. So this is what I was talking about previously. When you want to include like a style sheet in your page, you're going to be including that in the head element. So I'm going to just say style sheet styles.css, and we're going to just close that. And here, this is just the relative path. So because they're in the same kind of level in terms of the folder structure, you can just simply put in the name of your CSS file. And here we're just specifying that this link specifically provides the styling is the style sheet for our page. And yeah, so we're just going to specifically talk about some of the examples that we've covered previously. So for example, if we wanted to, this is an example of a declaration that you can have. So if you have, if you wanted to select like all of the different paragraph elements and then make them italicize everything, you can specify the font style and you can select the paragraph element. So if I save this and then go back to my page, you see that all of the paragraph elements are basically italicized, but I don't know if that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to just remove this, but that was just to show how you can select different elements. And when we can also select classes. So for example, if I wanted to, I don't know, just name this class like cool class. If I wanted to provide styling for a particular class, I first have to define the class, and then inside I would specify what kind of styling I want. So let's say I wanted to bold everything in that class, and then also make the color of my text green. I can just have these declarations, and if I wanted to specifically select this element here, I would say class equals cool class. And I need to save this, go back to our page, and you'll see that this heading is green. Again, I don't know if that's exactly what I want, but that was just to show you kind of how you would work with classes. If you wanted to select an ID, all you would do is you would replace the dot with a, what's it called? Like the number symbol. And then instead of specifying that you want to select a class, instead of having the class attribute, you would instead replace the attribute name with ID. And let's just say blue. And if I save, so I have ID here. So what I should expect to see is that line of text or this heading would be blue. And yeah, there we go. So we have the text set to blue. And yeah, you might be thinking that, oh, like class selectors, ID selectors, they're very similar and they do pretty much the same thing, and you can pretty much accomplish the same thing with different methods. And you are right. Essentially, they just have different usages with regards to which element you should use. So for example, typically for me, classes are usually used for repetitive cases. So if you have multiple instances of a class that you want to have styled on your page, you would use classes. But if you have a unique instance of an element of a style, you would use ID for that. But that's kind of just kind of what I like to do. And definitely, if there's another way that you prefer to do things, definitely do that. But that's kind of just a convention that I follow that is easier to work with. And yeah, but essentially they pretty much do the same thing. And so the next thing that we are going to talk about is something called CSS Grid. And CSS Grid is a way to basically structure your page into certain columns and rows. And so first, what we would do is if we say that we want to work with kind of this layout here, what we would do is we would first declare that we want to display this element as a grid. Then we specify the rows, and then we specify the columns. So here we're just auto-sizing every single element. And then if we wanted to actually use this element or this class, what we would do is we would have this div element as the parent element, and then inside that we would have exactly six divs. That would mean that we have 6 cells, like 6 elements in the grid. And there's also different ways of doing this. So for example, you might have heard of Flexbox, which you can use to mostly style things like one-dimensionally. CSS Grid allows you to kind of style things two-dimensionally, so you can specify not only the number of rows, but the number of columns as well. So for the purpose of our workshop, we're just going to mostly talk about CSS Grid and use this. But if you're curious, you can always do your own research as well. And yeah, definitely encourage that as well. And the next thing that is also important when you're making a web page is just thinking about the responsiveness of how certain things look on your screen. So what I mean by that is, for example, if I go into Devtools, one thing I can do is look at how my page looks on different devices. So on an iPad, what my page looks like. On iPhone X, what it looks like, you'll see that it looks very small, probably very hard to navigate. So one thing you can do to kind of fix that is you can have something called media queries, which allow you to selectively style certain elements depending on the size of your screen. And so for a media query, you basically, the syntax is that you first have to declare at media, and then inside this would be the condition that is met. So typically for here, you would define the different screen breakpoints, and inside here is completely like up to you what you want to do with it. But here, this example specifically is just styling what this grid would look like if the min width of our screen is 600 pixels. And these are some other examples of how media queries look like. So if I have various sizes of my screen that I want to work with, I can have different breakpoints with regards to the size of the screen. And so inside here, basically this would only run if the minimum width of the screen is 600 pixels. And then similarly, this would only run if the minimum width is 900. And inside, this would style basically this grid element here. And great, so now what we're going to do is we are going to actually implement these responsive kind of methods of designing our portfolio into our page. But first things first, let's see, just pulling up my, okay. Yeah, so first things first is you'll see that there's not a lot of styling on our page. So we're actually gonna just first add some styling, and then we're gonna add in the responsive elements like the media queries and some of the CSS grid that I introduced previously. And so I'm gonna just zoom out a little bit. First thing we're gonna do, just to fix how things are laid out on our screen, you'll see that it's like very close to the border of our screen, like very close to the edge. And so this might not look super good visually. What I want to do is just have a wrapper that wraps my entire page, and that I want to actually give it some margin or some padding on the side to actually push the elements towards the center a little bit. So I'm going to just declare a div element, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a class called container that contains the entirety of our of all the elements on our page, and I'm going to just move this closing div tag to the very end of the page, and right before the body, I'm going to just paste this here. And when we define the container class, what I want to do, I'm going to just specify that the max width is 840, and margin, I'm going to say that, so this is kind of a shorthand way of writing the margin, but for the margin top and the margin bottom, we're going to say we're just going to have no margins at the top and at the bottom, and then left and right, we're going to say auto, and that just automatically kind of positions our element at the center of the page. And yeah, if we look back, we'll see kind of how it looks like. And yeah, so now we want to maybe work on like aligning the different elements in the intro or the about or the projects page or the project section. And so what I'm going to do is For the intro section, I am going to just create a class called intro. And here I'm going to say intro. Going to actually just center align everything that's in here. So if I go back, you see that everything is centered here. And actually, I'm going to just change this margin to maybe 24 pixels for now, just because it looks a little bit too close to the top of the screen. So just to give it some space. And now we are going to arrange the about portion of our page. So that's just this section here that includes like your interest and what you do and things like that. So what we're going to do is we are going to use a CSS Grid for just styling how things are laid out. So first, I'm going to make a class called about grid. And inside this, for each of the child elements, I'm going to just make a class called about section. And similarly for here, section. And for the list, I'm going to create another class called about list. And yeah, so we need to actually create the declarations for those classes. So for the about grid, what I want to do, because I want to use CSS Grid. So remember previously to declare your grid, you need to have this display grid declaration, and then you also need to have the number of columns, or if you want to also specify the number of rows, you can also specify that. So display grid, then we want to have columns. So I'm going to just do 50, 50, 50%, 50%. And I think if you look back, if we take a look, we'll see that it is actually split into two columns now, so 50, 50 pretty much. And then if we actually take a look at a second, going to get out of the mobile or the responsive view. If you do Command-Shift-C, and if you take a look, you see that these are actually split into two different columns. And for the about section, we are going to just align all the text in each section to the center of the screen. And then we're going to say no text decorations. See, so now we see that we have all of the different items at the center of each column. And actually, we don't really need the text decoration, so I'm going to just remove this here. And for the about list, because we see that there's three bullet points right before each of our list items, we actually kind of want to just remove that because it looks a little bit kind of odd. So I'm going to just specify that we don't want any list style on it, and then we also want to have no padding. Okay. Great, so if you just make sure to save, and then when you go back to your page, if you don't see the changes automatically, just make sure to refresh your page. And yeah, we see that everything should be there. And great, so the next thing that we're going to do, actually, if you look at the mobile view, actually. So right now it still looks very small, like everything looks very small on mobile, and on mobile it still maintains the same two columns, but we might want to just maybe make things a little bit bigger and also see if I refresh the page. Second. Yeah, we might want to just realign some things differently or reposition some things just so that it doesn't look, doesn't require too much effort to look at the text on the screen. And what we can do is, you notice that everything was super small. So what we can do is we can actually specify like a viewport for the size of our screen when you're on mobile. So basically, if you want to add, or if you want to specify kind of the viewport, let's see, if you want to specify the viewport and make your page more responsive, what you can do is have this tag and then specify viewport and then the content with the Okay, so Meta just allows you to control the different dimensions and the scaling of our page. And then this width equals device width is just that's like the device width to allow your screen to be the full screen size of your device. And then the initial scale is just the zoom level that you can have. So typically it's just set to, you just want to set it to 1 by default. So what we should see now is if you go back to the mobile version, things are a lot bigger now. You no longer have to squint to see like all of the text, so that's a lot better. And see, another thing we might want to do is if we go back to this, we see that on mobile, the text under the about section looks very small. So what we might want to do is just have just one single column for the about section when we're on mobile. So we're actually going to make use of media queries, which we talked about previously. So for media queries, like I said, we have media, and then we're going to say max width 480 pixels. And then here, we're just going to specifically select the about grid here. And then we're going to say that the columns should be 100% when you're on mobile so that there wouldn't be 2 columns here. So another thing to note is that because we are starting our page as browser first, so because our page is mostly meant to be used on the browser first, we specify max width, or we use max width here. But if you're building like a mobile site or mobile app, for example, you might want to, instead of selecting max width, or instead of specifying the condition here being max width, you might want to do min width. It's just kind of like a convention that people follow, but I think that as long as you can get it to achieve what you want to do, max width and min width can be used interchangeably as long as you have the correct pixels or the correct dimension. So make sure we save, and then let me just zoom in here. Okay, 1 second. So hopefully this is a lot more clear, hopefully. And now if we go back, we see that indeed the about section is now 1 column, is no longer 2 columns. So it should be a lot easier to read for someone who's scrolling through your portfolio on like an iPhone, for example. But if we go back to the actual browser version of our page, we'll see that there's actually 2 columns. So we know that the media query works. So that's basically how you would construct a media query. And now we are actually going to make something similar, make similar changes to the project section. So first thing we're going to do is we are going to see, I am going to just create another div here just to enclose the the images that we have. And so I'm going to actually, before that, projects, going to make this heading H2 instead. See, and then class, I'm going to say heading. And then for this class, I'm going to just name this projects grid. So now if we go back to our style sheet, we're going to define the heading class. So for the heading class, we want to actually align the text to center. So if we save this, you see that the text or the heading is centered now. And the other thing is the projects grid. Second grid. So for here, we also want to make use of CSS Grid. So first, we want to say display grid. Then next thing is grid template columns. Again, we want 2 columns, so 50-50. And now if we go back, we'll see that there's exactly 2 columns. And you can actually, when you hover over, you can see the exact columns, but it looks like the images are not exactly centered on each, like inside each column, and it looks a little bit like a left align instead of being centered. So what we might want to do is we might want to actually style the images individually and maybe just center align them within each column. So we want to probably have another class called project image. I'm going to just copy this. Paste. Project image. Oh. And justify self. I'm going to say center. And I also want to just give it a little bit padding because as you can see, there's no space between these between each row of the of the picture that we have. So padding I'm going to just say 4%. And if we take a look at our element, we should see that the image is centered within each container or within each column. And then we also see some padding around the images, which is nice. And yeah, I think next thing, we're actually going to do one more thing. So if we look at the mobile view of our page, we see that, the images are just on top of one another and they don't exactly they kind of look odd because of like the overlapping nature. And we still have the 2 columns for the project section. So on mobile, we might want to actually make that just 1 column instead of 2 columns, similar to what we did for the about section. And so last thing we're going to do is just add another media query, max width. And let's say 480. So I'm going to specifically select the grid here. I'm going to just copy this and I am going to leave the display grid alone because it's still going to be applied. And then I'm going to just override the 50-50 style with 100 here so that we would only have 1 column. So save and go back. Now we see that the project section is 1 column. Yay. Okay, so if we scroll through now, it looks a lot more robust when you're switching between different devices. So now when we go back to our browser, we see that we still have the 2 columns here. And we could technically do that for the contact section as well. So for example, at the bottom over here, I think it looks a little bit too small right now. What we might want to do is we might want to just have, let's see. What we might want to do is we might want to just have another grid for the links and for the form here so that they're side by side on browser view. And then when you go into mobile, they would be like a single column, but I'll actually leave that for you guys to work on. Yeah, that's something that you could probably try to work on after this workshop. And great. So now we've done a lot to just style our screen and style our page, and just to make sure that our content is responsive. Before we go into applying like more advanced styling, I think I'm going to just give everyone a really quick break. So let's just take a really quick 5-minute break, and then I'll be also on the Discord channel just to answer any questions that people have. But let's just come back at 11:15. So get some water if you need to, and we will continue at 11:15. All right, welcome back, everyone. So previously we talked about, or we've kind of built out the content of our page and just the overall layout of the different sections that we have. So the about section, the project section, and now what we want to do is we want to actually make it a little bit look a little bit better. Right now it looks very plain, so we're gonna just work on adding more advanced styling for our page. And yeah, so let's see, let's go back to our code. So the next part for adding the advanced styling, we're going to be replacing some of these images with what I have. So if you go into the repo here, if you go into the README, you'll see where you can download the images. Personally, I have them locally, but if you want to use your own images, that's okay as well. But I just made it so that the images are the exact dimensions that we'll be using. Let's see, I'm going to just quickly unzip this file and just to make sure that I have access to the images. And instead of naming this folder as is, I'm going to just rename it to images so that I can easily reference the different images inside. So we are first going to replace this image, the placeholder with the profile picture that I have here. So instead of this HTTP link, we're going to say just images, profile picture. And if you save and go back, you'll see that now it's a picture of a dog. Okay, you can also replace these with your own images on your own time afterwards, but I just wanted to show kind of how you would do that. Essentially, you can instead of naming this images, a lot of people would name them like assets. So for example, if you have like different icons that you have, just have to make sure that this path is updated here. And yeah, if we go back, should still be the dog picture. And we might want to add in some just styling for the profile picture as well. Right now it looks a little bit plain. So there's some advanced styling that you can do to essentially style images. So for example, if I wanted to say class profile picture, what I can do is profile picture. Okay, I'm going to just make this picture circular. So I'm going to make the border radius 50. And I'm also going to add a quick shadow to the image. So also going to use a really quick shorthand. So for this, I'm going to just quickly copy this over just so that you guys can have a reference to what the different elements are. So the first argument or the first element is the X offset, and then the Y offset is like the vertical offset of the shadow. So I'm going to just say 4 pixels. The blur radius, so like the amount of blurring around your image, I'm going to just say 6 pixels, and then the spread radius, so like how much you want to spread the shadow. I'll just specify 0, and then the color RGB. Okay. And for the color, you can also have like hex code. So for example, this instead of what we had previously, just using this kind of notation here. But yeah, if we go back, we will see that now it is a very nice looking picture with like a little bit of shadow. And if you just wanted to see like what the shadow would look like if you change, I guess, the blur radius, for example, if you wanted to see how that would look like, you can change just how you can change it instantaneously in Devtools, but we're just going to save it to, we're just going to keep it at 6 pixels right now. And next thing, we also want to, so previously I mentioned that for CSS, you can also select a pseudo class. So for example, if you hover over an image, and I am going to change the shadow of the image when you hover over it to something, kind of give it like a hover over effect. Kind of give it an effect where it looks like a little bit lifted on the screen. So I'm just changing the Y offset and the blur radius. So if we save that and if we go back, when you hover over the image, you'll see kind of like a small change. It's very kind of not too noticeable, but I feel like it's kind of cool. So yeah, these are just some of the things that you can do with CSS to make it look more a little bit interesting compared to just having like plain elements. Yeah, and we are also going to replace the about section with some images that we have. So for this section, I'm going to just replace these with assets. Project 1, project 2, and lastly we have assets project 4. Okay, so now if we go back, we see that they're actually populated with images now. I mean, I really like dogs, so these are the placeholder images that I had. And last but not least, we might want to also change the font of our page to something a little bit more modern. So the next thing, another thing you can do in the head element is you can specify the font. So for example, I'm actually going to use the two free fonts from Google Fonts. So to link them, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another link. Another style sheet and href here. So for the href, I'm going to just copy what I have here. Href, so that would give us the font that we want. And inside styles.css, we actually want to select the body, so the entire body element, and we want to say font family. We have Noto sans serif. And for the different headings, we have H1, H2, H3, H4. Roboto mono, and we are going to just have mono space as the type. Now if we go back, we see that all of the different fonts are changed now. And yeah, so that's pretty much like some of a way to add like different fonts for your page. And you see that the contact section is still looks a little bit kind of disorganized, just not very robust. I'll leave that for you guys to work on your own time. I've also included some instructions or just some steps on what you can do to make it look a little bit better. So definitely try to work on this on your own time. Yeah, and last thing we are going to do is we might want to also change the background color, just so that it looks a little bit more like less plain. So background color, I have 2F. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Oh, okay, that's a little bit too bright for me, so I think might want to change it to something a little bit less bright. So maybe green, because I think having a green background, I hear it's better for your eyes, like easier on your eyes visually. So yeah, now we've changed it to a green background. And yeah, I think I'll leave that. I'll leave it there. And then for the contact section, I definitely encourage you guys to work on that on your own time and try to add some grid and make this form look a little bit more robust as well. And next, I just have some basic instructions for how you can deploy your site to GitHub pages. If you want to definitely follow these instructions, very easy. And yeah, so this is kind of the end of our workshop, but I just want to provide you guys with some resources on web development if you want to learn more or just get into it. So first of all, I just have the workshop source code, and then we have Mozilla's web documentations on, they have really good documentation on just topics or concepts related to web development. So for example, if you wanted to pick up more JavaScript, if you wanted to learn more about accessibility, how you can make your portfolio more accessible for people on screen readers, if you wanted to test out the functionality of your pages, or if you have different ways of rendering your pages, there's like server side, there's also client side. So you can learn a lot about these things on the Mozilla Developer Network docs. And for nwPlus, we've also compiled a set of resources for you to learn about very basic topics of just computer science in general. So for example, we teach you the basics of debugging. I know Stephanie has a workshop after mine on debugging. And there's also using Git, using the command line, and then the basics of APIs and databases and deployments. So lots of great resources compiled by people on our team. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys for tuning into our workshop. Hope you guys learned a lot, and definitely reach out to us if you have any questions, and feel free to reach out to me as well on LinkedIn or through email. I mean, you know my email through probably the instructions in the repo, but yeah, definitely don't hesitate to reach out, and hope you guys enjoyed the workshop. And yeah, I think that should be it. So I will stop sharing.